Hi. Oh dear. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, I'm going to go through some housekeeping matter first as a reminder. First of all, we are using Zoom application for today's event. So kindly make use of the Q&A function to raise any question regarding the topics and do not post question in the chat box. You can use the chat box function to network with each other while waiting for other participants to enter the room. And another information, this meeting will be recorded for our internal purposes. Have fun and enjoy the session. A very good morning to all the participants of IChemE Malaysia conference. Thank you so much for joining us for today. So before we get started, I'm going to go through some housekeeping matter first as a reminder. First of all, as we are using Zoom application for today's event, kindly make use the Q&A function to raise any question regarding the topics and do not post question in the chat box. You can use the chat box function to network with each other while waiting for other participants to enter the room. In addition, this meeting will be recorded for our internal purposes. Have fun and enjoy the session. Once again, a very good morning to all the participants of IChemE Malaysia conference. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Eva Glenn Robert and I am your MC for today's program. For your information, this is our very first IChemE Malaysia event entitled IChemE Malaysia 2021 COP26. Today's event is actually part of a global initiative that is carried out together with the IChemE UK and IChemE Dubai in conjunction with the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties COP26 in Glasgow that was held earlier this month. IChemE Malaysia aims to celebrate this global event by organizing a global conference with the theme Climate Change and Sustainability. The objective of us having this conference today are to spread the awareness about climate change to the Malaysian community, to share the impact of engineering on climate change and vice versa, and also to share knowledge and experience among working professionals and the audience. Today,
Apologies on that. So for today,
a great keynote speaker for
sorry, Eva,
Sorry?
you were frozen just now, but I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you. So where have I stopped?
Yeah, you can start from this slide.
Okay, sure. Panel discussion and the closing event. So next slide. Now, we have a great keynote speaker with us today, Mr. Murugadas Loganathan, who is the Climate Change and Energy Advisor representing British High Commission Kuala Lumpur. Mr. Muru is a trained wetland ecologist who was working in the field for 10 years with Wetland International prior to joining the British High Commission in 2005. He has the areas of experience in rapid ecological assessment of habitats, co-writing sustainable management, prescription with government, working with local communities, and making a case for conservation and protection of key ecosystem. Now, let us welcome Mr. Murugadas Loganathan to deliver his keynote speech today.
Morning. Thank you, Eva, for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I know it's quite early in the morning today on a Saturday, but it's important subject matter and I'm happy to be here. Many thanks to Chain Malaysia for inviting me to say a few words at this opening. Politically important subject matter, given the current context. So what I'm going to say is hot off the press. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, earlier this month, the UK government welcomed countries all over the world to Glasgow for the 28th UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26. Our moment to get the world on track to address the enormous threat of climate change. 25,000 people from 197 countries, including 120 world leaders, came together in the UK, demonstrating that countries can rise above their differences to unite against the common threat of climate change. They agreed on the Glasgow Climate Pact, which will accelerate the pace of climate action and keep our goal of limiting global warming at 1.5 degrees, or keep it alive, if you like. What are the important things that happened there? What sort of agreement? This can be, the question is whether it was a successful COP, whether it made just some progresses, or it was total failure. It all depends who you speak to, how people see it, which country think has benefited from the pack. Some will say, look, we could have done better, obviously, but getting 97 countries to a consensus is always a challenge. Despite this is the only conference in the world that meets every year, progress has been slow since the Paris Agreement in 2015. But having said that, I think countries succeeded in completing the Paris Rulebook. What is Paris Rulebook? The guideline, how the Paris Agreement is delivered. This includes agreement on Article 6. You all know this whole thing about, the framework for countries to exchange carbon credits, as well as common time frames, length of frames for national commitments, whether you do it 5 years, whether we do it 3 years, we report back and raise our ambitions, or whether it's going to be a continuous process, and the enhanced transparency framework, how to track and communicate progress of climate commitments. Each country is either having a robust, credible monitoring systems, or if there's lack of it, how are we going to help all, especially the developing countries, to ensure that their gathering of data, analysis of those data, and reporting back is of high value, and how can funds, capacity building programs can be helped, because a lot of developing countries will struggle to deliver this. So it was an overarching objective of the UK's COP presidency when we start off this journey 2 years ago to keep the 1.5 degrees alive. As the COP26 President Alok Sharma said at the end of the conference, 1.5 degrees is alive, but the pulse is very weak. We are barely there, despite all the commitments for 2030, and for those who are committed to 2050, net zero or beyond that. The question is pledge. You can commit now, but you still have to deliver. If you don't deliver, then we are looking at a temperature rise of 2.4, between 2.4, 2.7 degrees by end of century. But if we deliver everything we say we're going to do by 2030 and 2050, or if some of it was 2060 or 2070, then we probably, at best case scenario, we're looking at a rise of 1.8 degrees Celsius. The question is, the challenge is for all governments to deliver what they said they will deliver at 2030 and 2050. The 2030 is quite weak. The science is saying that we should hit at least we need to halve our emissions by 2030. But given what all the countries have contributed so far for the 2030, we call it more of a midterm commitments. Our emissions is expected to rise by 14%, almost 14%. That's not good, let alone cutting it half. So it's a long way to go. 2050 net zero is a nice timeline, but the question is, if you don't meet 2030, what's the chances of meeting 2050? That means you're just pushing the problem further down the road. It's like telling that I'll stop smoking by 2050, but what happens in between? Is that a reduction plan? So I guess that's where the worry is. For many people out there sitting outside the process, our government's really committed in doing this, or this is all, you know, nice commitments, pledges, nice words that can be delivered. So the Glasgow Pact, Wales' historic agreement will be judged on whether countries meet and deliver on the commitments they meet at COP26 across mitigation, adaptation, and finance. For countries like Malaysia and other climate vulnerable countries, it is particularly valid that the following commitments are considered for delivery. So what are the things they said, right? I mean, countries agreed to revisit the 2030 emissions reduction targets to bring them in line to 1.5-degree target by the next COP, which is hosted by Egypt. Countries agreed to phase down unabated coal power and phase out inefficient fuel subsidies, which is the first time these languages has gone to a COP document, official COP document. So that's good. Countries agreed to launch a work program, the global goal on adaptation. Adaptation is such an important thing, right? A lot of countries will struggle on this. And in order to do that, the world said we will at least double climate finance for adaptation for developing countries by 2025. Um, COP26 emphasized the status of loss and damage. This is about countries already suffering from problems. How do you do that? Look at all the Pacific Islands. They probably are not even a positive net emitter. And they're drowning basically. If you heard at the opening ceremony, the Prime Minister of Barbados got on stage and she said, "Look, 1/3 of the world is doing very well. The 2/3 are really not doing very well post the pandemic, and we are sinking. So basically, where's the fair deal here, right?" So she's really wants the developed world to say, "Look, this whole thing about finance is very important for us, and this level of finance is not just about mitigation. We need money for adaptation. We also need to compensate it for loss and damage because we are suffering from the work of all those people out there, all other countries who historically is emitted. The carbon budget has become so narrow, and it probably will be phased out in 11 years time. So it is basically a ramping up effort, cut emissions and adapt the best as we can, and how much the global world is willing to put finance, capacity building programs to the developing world, especially the most vulnerable and the least developing countries. So that's very important. COP also provided clarity and improved transparency on the mobilization of the so-called US 100 billion finance goal, which is expected to be only met in 2030, 2023. We have the Europe country has failed in this process. We're supposed to have these funds ready by 2020 onwards, but it hasn't happened. So now they're promised that by 2023, we will have that ready, and any shortfalls between 2020 and 2022 will be factored in the next 2 years. And they're also looking at long-term finance. That means anything beyond 2025, we're also looking at how we can scale up finance for that. Post-pandemic, as action for climate will be more costly. So we need to factor the whole inflation process as well. So that's very important. Agreeing this pact was not an easy process, and obviously certainly not one confined to the formal negotiation halls. It is the culmination of tireless negotiation, artful diplomacy, and listening to the voices of youth, academic, civil society, media, and the private sector, especially those most impacted by climate change. So I think it's very important. There's a few things that I picked up personally from the COP or the pact. Languages like, telling that the pandemic has basically made things difficult for us. I think putting that in the official language is good. The other thing about climate justice, I think that's what people are looking for, climate justice for the developing world. I think that language is also there, which is very good. Acknowledgement. Science and urgency is important. As you know, it's taken earlier this year, or at least middle of this year, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the highest authority on climate science, said that, we are barely keeping the 1.5 degrees alive, and therefore we need to do more. So underpinning science as the basis to take action is very good, and that has been captured quite well. I mentioned about carbon budgets. We are basically exhausted the carbon budgets. They estimated by in just 11 years time, burning carbon at the current rate is going to be catastrophe. It's not good. Adaptation, I've mentioned, is very important. the finance for it, and obviously, the question is, we need money for adaptation. Mitigation is great, but we need also ensure there's enough money goes into adaptation. Of course, I mentioned about this whole loss and damage. Climate change is an existential issue. It's already happening, has been happening, and therefore countries who are suffering the most need to be compensated for something they were not responsible for. As I said, you know, languages on inefficient fossil fuel subsidies and facing down coal are fantastic. At the first time in any COP, such languages have got in. As you know, coal is becoming less economic as we move forward. So it's great to see many countries in the world, including Malaysia, decided to phase out building coal power. And obviously, very important for engineers here is those issues about technology transfer and capacity building. Technology will not solve everything, but it's just one part in where I think new technologies, emerging technologies need to be, ramped up. And engineers like y'all probably could be, the center of this technology transition in fighting climate change. So I just want to finish off by saying, where was Malaysia in all this? As you know, our YB Environment Minister, Environment and Water Minister was at COP with 40 Malaysian delegations across ministries, state governments, cities, and private sector. You would have seen his national statement that was made on 10th November, 4 minutes, I think still available on YouTube. He said all the good things that Malaysia is doing. I guess the pinnacle of that is obviously when the Prime Minister, when unveiling the 12th Malaysia Plan, mentioned about Malaysia pledging to go carbon neutral earliest by 2050. You also mentioned about what we are doing on ramping up renewable energy. No new coal, obviously, was a statement made by his counterpart in the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources sometime in July. And obviously, there's efforts to do bids on electric vehicle, protecting nature, and also looking at other things on adaptation. I think next year is pivotal for Malaysia and CASA ministry. I think they're putting up a lot of programs, plans. There's talks about a climate change legislation as well, act in the works. So everything is going quite well in that sense, but challenges always lie. I mean, there's always challenges for developing countries. So the fact that we are, in terms of decarbonization, we are on the right pathway, and opportunities are plenty. The green transition happening all over the world post the pandemic makes business and economic sense. People and trading partners. Malaysia is a trading nation, demanding it. So including Malaysia, they must move to this greener transition. If you notice a quote made by the Malaysian Prime Minister at the unveiling of the 12th Malaysia Plan, I quote, transiting to carbon neutral becomes increasingly important as trading partners, capital markets, and financial institutions impose conditions on compliance with ESG principles in their investment decision and production. So there's realization this is how the world is moving, and we need to comply to that. So one of the things that I like to highlight audience out there, I'll just finish this. At the World Leaders Summit that happened the 1st and 2nd November, just you had the negotiation track, and also you had a lot of this countries coming together and endorsing a lot of stuff. As you know, Malaysia endorsed 2 declarations at COP26. One was on the Glasgow Declaration and forest and land use, basically saying a commitment to halt or reverse deforestation by 2030. They also signed up to the Global Methane Pledge, meaning that they will cut methane out from the system by 30%. Methane is such an important gas. They got 10 times or 15 times more potent than CO2 in terms of their index index for increasing the threat of climate change. So it's important, 2 important things. It's very important. But apart from that, I think There's one session, the World Leaders Summit, that looked into accelerating clean technology innovation deployment. It was hosted on 2nd November by the British Prime Minister with many interested countries, which culminated the breakthrough agenda. What is a breakthrough agenda? Is basically to deliver a clean, green future economy in turn that creates new jobs, growth, while ensuring clean energy transition that are affordable and accessible for all. So what was the breakthrough agenda decided or agreed? 42 countries covering more than 70% of global GDP committed to work together to make clean technologies the most affordable, accessible, and attractive option in each sector by 2030. Other related announcement was something on Green Grids initiative backed by about 80 countries, a new $10 billion fund to support energy transition, Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, and obviously there was a new coalition to accelerate innovation in sustainable agriculture. There was an Energy Catalyst Clean Tech Investment Fund, First Movers Coalition, where 25 major companies are committing to buying zero emission technologies in hard to decarbonize sectors. Now, I want to share this with you as young engineers and working across various sectors and engineering disciplines. You're aspiring to do good for people and the planet, and the world are moving into clean tech and sustainable options. Therefore, we should seize these opportunities and make some of this tech or engineering transition to also benefit Malaysia. With that, I'll end my keynote here. Thank you for kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Muru, for the remarkable keynote speech. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to next speaker for today, Professor IR Dr. Abdul Aziz bin Abdul Rahman. Our presenter today is currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Value Creation and Enterprise at the University of Malaya. Prof. Aziz undertakes research in the field of chemical engineering, focusing in the area green technology, waste management, and advanced waste treatment. He has supervised more than 100 PhD and master students and has published about 300 research papers in high-impact journals and conference proceedings. He was also one of the most highly cited researchers in the year of 2020 by Clarivet. As a professional and a chartered engineer, he is also active in consulting and advisory activities in the field. Now, I would like to invite Prof. Aziz to deliver his topic today with the title, Changes for the Engineers in Realizing Sustainable Growth.
Hi, everyone. Very good morning. I'm Aziz from University of Malaya. I was supposed to be delivering this short talk in person. However, my university have a graduation day today, so I got to be there. I can't afford to miss it. I got to call some names and announce certain things. Therefore, I've recorded this video with a slideshow for us to go through together. Well, I may not be able to answer question and answer at the end of the day, but definitely we can have a online engagement if there are any questions to be asked. Now, today I'll be talking very briefly about challenges for engineers in 21st century for climate change. This may be a topic that is been spoken about in many occasions, in many platforms, and in many places. But today I will take us through from a different dimension, from engineers' point. Now, we have been engineers. I'm an engineer. All of you are engineers. So we have been contributing to the environment, to sustainability or sustainable development. In many ways, so I can name a few here. We develop technologies for treatment, all sort of treatment: water treatment, solid treatment, toxic gas treatment, toxic waste treatment. So that made us safe to live here. Okay. We optimize processes. When you optimize processes, it means the best use of raw material. It means best use of energy. It means best use of resources. It means best use of expensive things and all that. And we do simplify process. By simplifying process, we may able to produce things quicker. We will be able to do things simpler. And we do also converted waste material into usable items, into materials, into energy, and we add value to waste. And engineers significantly have worked on and if generated technologies, generated processes, generated services which reduces the use of energy. So all this contributed to our well-being and also to the climate change in a positive way. Now, however, still there are many things to be done. Okay, still there are many challenges for engineers. Industrial premises are still generating waste in terms of many materials, in terms of energy. And I will quote some of the examples here. For example, palm oil mill effluent, still contain sometimes up to 80,000 milligram per liter of organic matter inside. Of course, we have taken palm oil mill effluent and produced biogas. We have recovered and all that. But in the first place, why are we producing a waste that contain high level of such organic matters? Can we improve our palm oil processing process into a process that really produces a pomade that contain very small amount of organic matter? That's a question to ask. Now we shout with our success of producing biogas, but the real question is, why are we producing this waste that contain high level of organic matter? And many of processes are still producing a lot of waste. Okay. Next example is gas flaring. Okay, if you go to oil and gas platforms, you can see gas flaring. Yes, this is done to reduce the pressure. But can we recover this waste? Can we do processes which we don't have to resort to gas flaring? And these are all waste of energy. Not only that, it produces greenhouse gases which contribute to climate. Can we do something about this? And many of our processes, chemical process, biological processes, are using high amount of water, okay, high amount of energy. Can we produce technologies? Can we produce processes? Can we operate at a level where the usage of water is reduced, or even for example, waterless cleaning and things like that? Can we do such things? And our water recycling percentages are also very low. So these are the some of the challenges that we have for engineers. Okay, what we can do to tackle all this. So we have done significantly to the environment. We have contributed significantly to the environment, but still there are many challenges still there in front of us now, today, right now happening. Therefore, what is the way forward? The way forward for us is to take up these challenges with new tools that we have. Okay, we got to we got to start looking at data supported decision making, not trial and error. We should change the way that we should enhance the way that we have been working. Artificial intelligence is another area where the take-up is still not widespread. Okay, some of us think that it is a domain of mechanical engineers, and mechanical engineers think that it is a domain of electronic engineers and all that. It is not so. So I think all of us has to take up artificial intelligence as part of our tool, part of our system, part of our things that we use to improve processes, etc., etc. Use of Internet of Things, optimizing processes. So all these are something that is happening currently. And therefore, with all these things, hopefully we can contribute better to take up the challenges that I mentioned earlier. Now, if you look at what's happening, what has happened in the last 2 years, okay, we human rolled out vaccine within 2 years. This has never been done before. This is one of the greatest success of man. Yes, our scientists produce vaccine, the know-how in the laboratory, but we engineers made it possible to mass produce this, distribute this all over the world, keep the vaccine safely, and go down to the people to be vaccinated. And because of that, some movements has improved. Because of that, the way that we manage COVID is there. Because of that, the normal things that we used to do can be done now to a certain level. So thanks to engineers. So engineers made it possible to produce vaccine. So similarly, we can do the same thing for the environment. This is my point here today. So with that message, I urge my young engineers who will be listening, who are listening now, to take up this, to take up the challenge, and to realize that there are still many challenges to be overcome. And with the challenge come opportunities. There are many opportunities for businesses. So my advice to my younger colleagues are learn about these challenges from water supply, from wastewater treatment, from food production, many other areas. And with these tools available, automation, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and data gathering, data analysis, and all that, I'm sure we can contribute more to the environment. And with that, I feel that in 21st century, the engineers can contribute to the environment like never before. Thank you very much for listening. I wish I would have been here, but let us meet in other occasion. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Prof. Aziz. We have come to the end of our first speaker's topic. Now we will be having a 10 minutes break before the next session. See you after the break. Hello and welcome back, everyone. Now it's time for us to hear the topic regarding the engineer's role in shaping zero, the need to be more creative with climate mitigation and adaptation measures to tackle climate crisis. That will be delivered by IRS Gandhi Suppiah. Before we go any further, let me first introduce our respected speaker's background. Sir Gandhi is a senior associate at TSA Management in Malaysia and leads the transportation practice for Southeast Asia, focusing on developing resilient and sustainable transport in infrastructure. Mr. Gandhi has a successful track record of delivering major transport infrastructure projects globally from concept through design, construction, and asset management. A career-oriented chartered civil engineer and fellow of ICE, Gandhi has over 20 years experience. Gandhi has held various consulting roles such as special advisor for the Falkland Island government and FCO lead technical advisor for transport for London and honor representative for UEM and Khazanah National in Malaysia. Sir Gandhi is passionate about employing smart infrastructure technology to deliver resilient and sustainable infrastructure with the aim to achieve net zero. Now, I would like to invite Sir Gandhi for his session. The stage is yours, Mr. Gandhi.
Thank you very much, Eva, and good morning to everyone. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank IChemE Malaysia for inviting me to give this talk. Could you go next on the slide, please? Yeah, so yeah, just stop there. Can you go back, please? Yeah. Not to the next slide, but yeah, just leave it there. So my topic really talks about engineering. And for me, the climate change is a climate crisis, really. And we, from the ICE itself, or, Institution of Civil Engineers, we are taking this as one of the most serious and most complex threat to our future. We know that COVID has impacted us for the last 18 months, nearly 2 years, and the effects will be known for the next, who knows, 2 years, 3 years or so. But climate crisis, this climate change effect will impact us for the rest of our lives, and it will, dominate what we do and how we live our lives going forward. I just think about COP26 and think about, the most dominant aspect that came out, which is a bit weird, but the wording of phase down to phase out, dominated headlines. But there are a lot of other good things that came out of COP26, which seem to have sort of, while those who know that, a lot of mitigation measures that's been put in place, adaptation requirements, from talking about deforestation to even, reducing fossil fuels or mitigating against fossil fuels. These are really clear wins, following from Paris, limiting, to below 1.5 degrees is ultimately crucial, and actually, the requirement to limit the impact to our lives is, couldn't be more serious and more considered that, the most important thing that we will do as an engineer to look at how we limit this impact from an engineering point of view. Next, please. We treat this as a crisis because crisis is a situation which is, affects groups, communities, whole society, where the danger could be, is imminent sometimes, or it can take some time to realize. And this could be from a variety of different things, from hurricanes, floods, to earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, obviously not directly impacted to climate change, but has effects to climate change. But then crisis comes from other things like what's happened now with the pandemic and economic rises and so on. So next, please. And you can see some of these crisis aspects that comes from climate change is the fires that has raged across so many different parts of the world, flooding events. The one that you see on the bottom right is in Indonesia. That is quite significant. But some of the other aspects is snow in in New Zealand changing to brown. I mean, that's due to volcanic, but then the effect has far-reaching aspects on climate change. Next. So crisis is a time when difficult and important decisions must be made. So we are at that point. Next. So climate crisis, if you look at this, this is produced by the European Climate Agency. And if you look from the year 2000, particularly, there's an upward trend, although in between the sort of spikes. But you can see there's an upward trend of cost of weather disasters. And we are currently at about 40 billion euros, globally, annually, that we lose due to various weather disasters. Next. And if you look at Southeast Asia, and McKinsey produced a report earlier this year that shows that Southeast Asia will and potentially could face more severe consequences of from climate change than any other parts of the world. Now, this is quite worrying. Living in this part of the world, we need to be a lot more aware of this existential threat. And when you look at it, China, India, Japan, particularly China, is potential. Or you look at the amount of risks and loss in GDP due to the climate aspect, particularly from drought, is a significant amount. Over 250 billion US dollars. So it puts it in pale comparison what happens in Europe, just from one country itself, the loss of GDP in Asia. And so this will have a trickling effect across the entire Southeast Asia and the nations, and they will have indirect losses due to this. Next. Climate change has got a direct impact on human health. If you went to a doctor and the doctor said that you have a disease and you will have to change your lifestyle, and if not, that disease is going to kill you, then climate change is a disease on this planet. It's created by to some extent, our social needs. And the latest report shows that we have had a direct impact on climate change and that report is from IPCC. I'll come to that in a while. And it shows that how the climate drivers and the different exposures that have different impacts to us directly, how it's going to affect our living, how it's going to change the capacity of individuals and communities and institutions alike, and that how we may have to change our lifestyles to cope with this change in the climate impact, and that we need different or change in social infrastructure to be able to cope, and therefore we need probably different facilities that needs to be designed as part of this to change and to cope with how we deal with climate effects. Next, please. Yeah, keep going until this slide just loads up. Okay, thanks. So while we talk about net zero, and I think there are people who might not fully realize what net zero is, but net zero, from IPCC, who in 2018 and recently with their sixth report also have clearly issued a very, very stark warning that if we do not limit the warming to 1.5 degrees, then the Earth will face some serious consequences that will impact our way of life. And we have to do it at a significant pace and scale. We cannot just take our time, and we cannot just say that, yeah, we'll do it in the next 50 years, although that's the case in a variety of different countries. But on the whole, we need to look at it at a scale and at a pace that's going to establish this net zero scope, and therefore how this will impact, in terms of how do we design, how do we construct, how do we operationalize, and how do we then look at offsetting, the remaining carbon. So establishing a scope of how do we treat the carbon impact or the emissions as such is going to be a clear part of how do you define net zero. So there are different definitions from different people in different ways, but from aspect of engineering, it is going to come towards how do we, sort of put in policies in place, how do we design, how do we operationalize, and how do we manage it and across its entire life cycle. Next, please. Well, these are some of the targets. Some of these targets were, I would say, pre-COP26, but then they are still targets that needs to be achieved. This has been set. This has not had much change in it since COP26, and to limit the warming well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees will require drastic reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions. And I'll come to the GHG emissions and the impact engineers will have of this, because much of the work that engineers do will have a significant impact on how we look at limiting or achieving net zero emissions. And while scientists can say, IPCC can mention that, we need to do this, it's engineers who are part of the significant chain who have the significant responsibility as part of achieving these net zero targets, because what they do will have a direct impact on what comes next in terms of achieving those targets. Next, please. So just a quick touch on IPCC's 6th report. And climate change is not all about temperatures, right? Because as you can see, it has actually multiple different changes in different parts of the world, and different areas will either have a significant amount of rainfall, or there's going to be intense drought in many other regions. So it is not just due to temperature. There are also cooling effects in different parts of the world that do not actually suffer cooling. So temperature, when they say 1.5 degrees, it's not 1.5 degrees in every part of the world. In fact, some are going to be warmer, some are going to be cooler as part of this. But then in general, that this effect is going to be across various sort of subtropics where there's going to be increased precipitation. And so how do you capitalize on that? What do you do with your dams? How do you adapt your dams? How do you make them resilient to cope with this increased rainfall? And how do you ensure that the people living downstream are not going to be impacted? So how do you look at thawing and the additional water that's going to come into this into the sea? How do you then change cities as part of it, because the heavy precipitation and rise in sea levels, and if you look at so many different countries like Maldives and Fiji Islands, they're going to have a significant impact due to the rise in sea level. So, and the IPCC report is very clear that it's the influence of human on the climate is undisputed now, that we have a direct impact on what we have done that has caused this climate change, and that we need to look at how do we tackle carbon dioxide, which is the main driver for climate change, and how do we stabilize the climate to ensure that we reduce the GHG emissions towards net zero. Next, please. So when you look at before COP26 and with the Paris rulebook, the way, the direction that we're heading towards 3 degrees. And at that point, 3 degrees, it's really an existential impact on the planet, and whatever we design, we develop, we construct might not be able to adapt to this climate effect at 3 degrees, and resilient infrastructures probably won't be able to cope. So keeping it to 1.5 degrees, or just about even 1.5, we just about will be able to manage to cope with the impacts from climate change. Next, please. I'll just quick touch on this, but when you look at the CO2 emissions, and you can look at different carbon sinks around the world and what happens in the atmosphere, oceans, and how much we release and how much we put back. There is still a budget imbalance. There's a -1, which is actually an increase on the amount of CO2 emissions on planet Earth. So we need to find a point where it's going to be neutral rather than actually, so it needs to be a positive rather than a negative. And we can see that the biggest fossil emitter is, none other than coal. And coal is coming from various countries. Particularly China is one of the largest emitter, followed by US and EU and India and so on. So, and much of this, with the COP26 language of phase down or phase out, will determine what's going to happen in the future. I'm not sure, but science will come and engineers will have to be able to manage and design and develop and construct. Next, please. And you can see that in terms of cement, which is the largest sort of material on this planet, the production of cement, results in a significant, of course, CO2 emission, but at the same time, there's a carbonation. So the process of chemical reaction during the whole period of a concrete structure as such, as it slowly absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere. But you can see that it's not good enough, and it's absorbing not to a net zero effect. So there'll be more than say 0.5 of gigatons of CO2 emitted due to the use of cement. Next, please. So construction and carbon. Now we're really coming to the crux of from an engineering point of view. Around 70% of all global emissions produced can be tracked back to infrastructure, right? And so we're talking about buildings and construction, responsible for over 39%. So while these are new builds and probably rehabilitation, but some of the big impacts and the rise in the impact is coming from operational emissions. And so when you look at the different scopes, there are scopes 1, 2, and 3. And scope 3, which is the embodied carbon emission, although it shows it's 11%, is the most complex and difficult one to tackle. And this is where sustainability strategies and framework need to be put in place that will look at the entire carbon impact in infrastructure, and how do we build and directly put in materials and construction material, different construction choices that look at how do we change behaviors of operational emissions and embodied carbon emissions. And this will directly have a significant impact on the CO2 or GHG emissions, and hence this only can and directly be, designed out by engineers. Next, please. Low carbon concrete roadmap, and this is one of the things that in Malaysia we really need to adopt and think about. We use concrete everywhere. It's the most dominated material on this planet. By 2040, it is expected that the biomass of the entire Earth, concrete will supersede and be larger than any other thing on Earth, and that's just shocking to think about. And that it's incredible that this material hasn't changed over the 100-odd years since it's been invented. It's absolutely crucial, of course, to keeping our societies going, improving quality of life, but we also have to think about how do we use concrete? How do we improve the use of concrete? How do we change concrete from its current form into something that will have less impact on the probability of warming and that emissions of GHG. Next, please. And ICE earlier this year produced a State of Nation report, and there was 6 pathways or 6 actions that engineers will have to take as part of it. And one is, we need to treat the climate change as an emergency. It's when it's an emergency, when it's a crisis, that we will actually act and do things quickly. And so we need to treat it like this. Bring carbon into every conversation. Talk about it to every single client, every single people that you meet each time at work, even in your daily life, you need to talk about this. And you got to look at how can you influence the end users? How can you get involved at the early stage itself, at the point of policy, at the point of framework, at the point of strategy, rather than the person that's at the other end and looking at just implementing it. Well, you will have some influence, but you need to have you will have better influence, or higher, significantly more influence at the conceptual stage, at the policy end. And you need to then look at getting the right outcomes when you design and build this infrastructure. You need to decide, you need to put it in place, how do you measure and track it, and that provide that the right outcomes has been delivered. And look at creative, different type of solutions. Don't look at same old, same old. Don't hide behind the code. Look at how you can be looking at solutions that will produce or develop more resilient infrastructures, and be responsible for this resilience. Take accountability and make sure that it produces the right outcome that we are looking for in keeping it to 1.5 degrees. Next, please. Just a quick one. Funding and financing is going to be extremely crucial, and having the right metrics in place and demonstrating that it will be sustainable, and that you can have innovative and whole life thinking in terms of costs, not thinking about just CapEx, but OpEx, and across this entire life cycle, and how this impacts climate resilient infrastructure, ensuring that using the right tools, right standards, and that providing that visibility to the financiers to get the right financing to make it viable and to put it into the right projects is going to be a clear requirement going forward. Next, please. And what should we do? I've touched on this, but just make sure that we use the right materials. Don't over design it. Take accountability. Be with the policymakers as such, and look at how standards are. Look at how we look at mitigation measures. Look at selecting materials that are far more efficient. Look at how does it impact the chain of transportation, of bringing the materials on site, where embodied carbon impacts can be measured. Look at materials that will be that are robust at the same time, but so less maintenance, less repair, reduce refurbishment requirements, and reduce landfill areas, use recycling materials. So these are some of the ecosystems, some of the things that we need to use and develop a lot more in Malaysia. So we need the entire construction project cycle. This ecosystem will need to be put together in a better way, so that we understand the entire impact and the chain, and how does this relate to GHG emissions. Next, please. And what should we do? I've mentioned already, these are some of the things that we need to do as a client, ensuring that the right scope, the right technical requirements are in place, and that set of requirements on how do you reduce the impacts on climate, sustainable choices of materials. And so clients have got a significant part of it, and similarly designers need to do the right thing, to have the right knowledge, share this knowledge, have the right specification for low carbon solutions, pioneer new materials as such that meets low carbon objectives. So, and develop new skills. So you've got to unlearn and relearn on how we need to do things. And this is a crucial part of your continuous professional requirement to keep up with changes that are happening, and how does this then look at impact on carbon emissions. Next, please. I wanted to cover this very quickly, just to say that, in terms of crisis and emergency, we need to just be able to look at how do we adapt and transform and recover when there is a crisis, and we need to have the right framework in place. And the UK is coming up with this, and the NIC, the National Infrastructure Commission. So we need to look at adopting similar sort of standards in this part of the region, so that we are able to then recover quickly from any crisis that is going to impact us. Next, go after this. Yep. Next. And a clear part of this of learning from crisis is having a risk management in place. Make sure that we have it in place before it happens, not after it happens, because lessons learned are great, but then we've not mitigated against some of the bigger disasters that will impact societies and communities. And yeah, do not stick your head in the sand. Make sure that you're aware of the consequences of it. Next, please. So this is my final bit in the ICE saying shaping zero. Sorry, I probably have taken a little bit more time, but one of the things that's individually we need to look at what we want to do, and that will impact your choice and your thinking about what sort of solutions also you put out in place. You shift from cars to public transport. Malaysia need to do that a lot more. We are car-loving nation over here. When you look at better use of road space, whether it's cycle or other public transport modes, and switch to more EV cars, which is great to see that's in the budget. Walk a lot more. Carbon offsets is a great thing, but but I think we need to look at other forms. Look at sustainable sources, plant trees. So these are simple things that individually and as a engineering student to a profession should be and must do as part of what are you going to do in shaping zero. So I think that finishes mine. Thank you very much to Chain, and thank you, Iwan. Back to you. And thank you for all for listening. I won't go to the case study share.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Sir Gandhi, for your insightful sharing just now. Now we will invite the next speaker for today, Sir Lee Yao Kay, the Senior Manager Operational Excellence in Sarawak Energy. Sir Lee Yao Kay is currently leads SEB Power in the digitalization journey that transformed from traditional power plant towards digital power plant. Prior to this role, he has served in Sarawak Shell Berhad as the lead in remote monitoring and diagnostic, where he has set up and operationalized the remote monitoring and diagnostic center that has contributed to USD millions from identifying threats and opportunities. He has also worked for Petronas in his earlier career. Sir, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, Eva. Right. I think in the interest of time, I think I have about 10 to 20 minutes. Feel free, Eva, to ping me if I overshoot my presentations today. And if there's any Q&A, I may not be able to look at the Q&A chat. Please feel free to stop me anytime and to post the questions to me. So, well, good morning, and thank you that you have provided me an opportunity to share our journey, Sarawak Energy's journey of hydropower sustainability, and how the company moved towards becoming a digital utility. And not forgetting, congratulations to Change for this first inaugural event, and looking forward for more of such events. And of course, I will look forward to connect and collaborate with our fellow IMechE members and other associates. Right, next. Let me say a little bit about us, as many of you may not know who we are, although we have been around for a long time. In fact, this year we are celebrating 100 years of powering Sarawak. We have grown a great deal over the span of time, transforming from a single unit under the Public Works Department back in the Brook administration time, into now a vertically integrated energy developer and a power utility, which are wholly owned by Sarawak government. We are also regulated by the Sarawak's Ministry of Utilities for electricity provisions that we serve in Sarawak populations of about 3 million people through 700 overs accounts holders. And our vision is to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity for Sarawak by meeting the region's needs for reliable and renewable energy, that we are powered by a strong workforce of 5,400 people. And as of today, we are the largest hydropower developer in Malaysia, and with an ambition to become a regional powerhouse by advancing the hydropower and sharing our renewable energy resources with our neighbors. Next. Right. So if you look at the left, right, a little bit about ourselves. Currently, we are committed to and focus on achieving our targets to achieve 100% electrifications by the year 2025. With the development of hydropower in the middle portion, the carbon intensity for power generations in Sarawak has reduced by 76% since 2009. I just would like to repeat again. Just 10 years ago, we have successfully reduced by 76% of carbon intensity. So with this high percentage of hydropower in our generation mix today, Sarawak is able to offer among the lowest average tariff within ASEAN's. In fact, we are 38% lower than Peninsular Malaysia and more than 100% lower than Singapore. With our competitive tariff, that we have attracted many significant investment from power-intensive industry to Sarawak. In realizing our aspirations in becoming a regional powerhouse, we are progressing the Borneo grid with first export to West Kalimantan, Indonesia back in the year 2016, and planning for expansion through the interconnections with Sabah. Our partnership with the Indonesia's northern province of Kalimantan, or Kaltara in short, plays an important role in our aspirations. In the year 2018, we established our first international joint venture subsidiary to develop a 1,375 megawatt of hydroelectrical plants at Mentara Indok, which is at the Kalimantan. Next, please. As we advance hydropower in this region and grow our position as a leading developer of this renewable energy source in Southeast Asia, we need to commit to sustainability. All of this is to make sure that we will maximize the positive impact of our operations and to minimize the negative impact. As we pursue in the sustainability energy development as a quote and unquote corporate activities, Sarawak Energy is able to tap into and also contribute to global expertise and best practices through our international partnerships. We are a platinum member of IMechE, International Hydropower Association. Sarawak Energy is also a gold member of the Global Reporting Initiatives, GRI. We are also a member of the UN Global Compact Network Malaysia, which we serve as an advisory board member. Next, please. Leveraging on our position as a provider of electricity from mainly renewable resources, we are the first in Sarawak to include our electrical vehicles as part of our so-called official corporate fleet. Since electricity in Sarawak is largely renewable and affordable, it is very logical to electrify our transportation sector as well to reduce further the carbon footprint in Sarawak. So we are also one of the partners to sponsors of the first electric bus in Kuching. We have also been working on a project that is ahead of development curve, working on the hydrogen economy blueprint, which is on hydrogen fuel cell transportation. The IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, has stated that hydropower is still a missing link in the global energy transitions by 2050. In the long run, hydrogen could become a key element in 100% renewable energy system. In Sarawak, we are blessed with ample water supply that give us a great platform in advancing these technologies for transportation, for industrial, for power. As we speak, and we are also partnering with Linde, one of the world, in fact, they are the world's largest industrial gas company, where we pilot the first integrated hydrogen production plant and refueling stations in Southeast Asia. So people have been asking, why are we doing this? No, we believe that we must always look ahead and explore new ways of doing things, always being left behind. Next, please. Another initiative that we are working on is the Renewable Energy Certificate, REC. In short, we have launched during our Sustainability and Renewable Energy Forum back in 2019. So REC is not something new. No, it is widely adopted around the world. For instance, in Taiwan, they call it TREC. In the States, they call it the Green E. In Australia, they call it the Large Scale Generation Certificate. So electricity users can now basically purchase the renewable power in a certified manner. Large corporate users can also go further to commit 100% renewable to meet their corporate sustainability strategies. In fact, we have secured REC purchase from both local and overseas company. So why, what does REC benefits to us? Basically, if this is sustainable and it can be continued, in long run, it could help to achieve economics of scales and to increase supply of renewable energy. Next, please. So I basically share a little bit of our hydropower sustainability, and I'll move on to how the journey to a digital utility. So in Sarawak Energy, we have the digitalization blueprint that was implemented back in the year 2018 to assess the value gain and provides a guideline for becoming a digital utility. And it explains the trust and traits of a successful digital transformation. We have 5 digital trusts for our digital transformation: the digital foundation, the new way of working, data as strategic assets, ahead of curve, and smart business. Our journeys towards digital utility begins with building or setting up a robust digital foundation, which includes faster and stable internet connections for the office, for the assets. We have devices which better speed and greater mobility. With that strong foundation in place, we can then move on to reimage the new way of working, which are focusing on providing tools and work processes that makes us more mobile and more agile. With the digital foundations and the new way of working, the volume and velocity of data will increase. So we are now able to use this data to basically generate both operational and business insights, which helps various levels of within the organizations to make a better decision or even the best decision at the given point of time. So to keep ourselves at the top quartile, we need to develop innovative solutions and also enabling smart businesses. So introduction of process automations, which reduces error and ensures standardized output while we optimize our resources. Next, please. So these are among our digitalization initiatives. Sarawak Energy had also brought in the new digital innovations. For example, we incorporated the virtual reality VR technology to our technical training. By implementing the VR technical training, in specific our 11 kV switching, it able to enhance the training experience for especially to our young technicians by allowing them to conduct more trials, simulate the worst case, and also conduct it remotely. Next, please. Some initiatives to achieve operational excellence through digitalizations includes the digital power plant blueprint, which aims to develop a remote monitoring and diagnostic center, a generation control center, and coupled with the improvement in our CMMS, the computerized maintenance management system. The aim is to basically to bring greater reliability, greater agility, better efficiency and productivity, and more importantly, greater profitability. Next, please. Remote monitoring center basically will connect to all the power stations and is powered by advanced analytics tools, and it will supported by the subject matter experts. It will be able to perform monitoring, troubleshooting and diagnostic remotely, and also provide early warning system to power stations about the potential dangers and issues. GCC, Generation Control Center, will unlock, I would say, remote possibilities with new technologies that allows remote automations or remote operations of power stations from a centralized site. So as we speak, we will be soon to connect our hydroelectric plants via a secure network, and GCC will be a solution to streamline and optimize the operations. Next.
No, sir. Sorry for interrupting, but we have passed the 11:25
All right,
time.
thanks. Okay,
Okay.
thanks for informing. I will just go briefly. I think I have another 2 more slides. So this is basically our solar energy technology as well to increase the proportion of renewable energy in our generation mix, that we have plans to develop floating solar in the reservoir of Patang hydroelectric plants. Next, please. And these are some of the smart grid blueprint that we do for the retails, mobile meter management system. We have the e-customer experience. Right, next. So, this is basically to explain that we are also moving towards the rural as well through the rural electrification scheme to implement the solar hybrid power stations to provide our rural areas which are not easily reached by wired. And this will help us in advancing towards our aspirations of 100% electrifications by the year 2025. I think that will be my last slides. So we came a long way since 10 years ago through a long journey, and right now we are in the 2020 to 2022 roadmap. So basically, in a nutshell, we are trying to say that we are moving from good to great through our Solar Energy Excellence 2020. Right, that's all from me. I think the last will be a thank you page. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for the insightful talk just now. It is such a very amazing, and I really like the talk actually. Well, now we have come into the last session for today, which is the panel discussion. This panel discussion will be, sorry for. So we have our 10 minutes break before the last session begins. Thank you and see you soon.
Right, thank you very much.
Now we have come into the last session for today, which is the panel discussion. This panel discussion will be moderated by IR Mas Yu Kian, a council member of the Institution of Engineers Malaysia. Let me introduce you about our moderator's profile for today. She is the past chairman and appointed corporate member of IEM Women Engineers Section IEM, professional engineer registered with Board of Engineers Malaysia, member of National STEM Association, past Secretary General of Women Engineers, Asian Federation of Engineering Organization, and she is also active advocate for STEM education and has been leading and supporting many STEM events in the area of robotics and coding, STEM for girls and women in engineering. She has a belief that STEM education is the key to raising a generation of climate change leaders. Now, I will pass the floor to IR Mas Yu Kian for the panel discussion session.
Thanks so much, Eva. Hello and good morning. My name is Mas Yu Kian. I'm delighted to be here and thank you so much to the IChemE Malaysia for organizing this very first and very significant IChemE Malaysia 2021 COP26 event, inviting me to moderate this panel discussion and inviting all the distinguished panelists we have here today to discuss the theme of climate change and sustainability. And thank you to all of you in the audience for taking time out from your very busy Saturday morning to be here today. It is extremely important that you also understand that this important part of the discussion will involve your questions. If you would like to ask questions, you may raise them in the Q&A box and we shall share them to the panelists. You may also indicate to which panelist is the question for. A little bit background, COP26, one of the most important diplomatic meetings in history, reached consensus on key actions to address climate change last Saturday, one day after their scheduled conclusion. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries gathered to discuss about clean energy, net zero, addressing energy poverty, and to reach a common goal to make an impact. COP26 summit ended with an apology from COP26 president for the way the negotiations have unfolded, as he responded to the disappointment when a commitment for all 196 signatories said to phase out coal was watered down to phase down coal. So on another tone, developing countries stress the need for equity and fairness. Malaysia has echoed the language of developed countries with our goal to be carbon neutral or achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Both have been announced in our 12 Malaysia plan, a 530-page document. Okay. Today, we have our esteemed panels here to discuss how we can achieve our net zero commitment made at COP26 and what is our pathway towards getting there, specifically from the engineering perspective. Will we pursue rapid decarbonization to reduce our climate footprint, or will we continue to rest our economy on fossil fuels, followed by rapid digitalization or other measures to net our emissions to zero with offsets, closer to a carbon neutral approach? What is the best way to solve the net zero equation? We have here with us Mr. Murugadas Loganathan, Climate Change and Energy Advisor at British High Commission, who was at the conference as our panel today. Joining us on our panel are also Mr. Lee Yao Gay, Senior Manager, Operational Excellence at Sarawak Energy. Mr. Yao is a mechanical engineer. And Engineer Gandhi Suppiah, Head of Transport, Southeast Asia and Senior Associate at TSA Advisory. Engineer Gandhi is a civil engineer. Our last panel, Professor Engineer Dr. Abdul Aziz Abdul Raman, would like to extend his apologies and regret for not being able to be with all of us here today. Okay. So to start, let me share the virtual stage with Mr. Muru. For all of us to have the right context and to set the scene for the panel discussion today, maybe you can help explain so off in what capacity you were attending the conference. In that capacity, has COP26 been a success or a failure? And as a Malaysian citizen, will your answer be the same? And most important of all, what COP26 did and didn't accomplish? Over to you, Mr. Buru.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, not an easy question to answer, but the thing is, I didn't personally attend, but being part of the British government based in KL, we follow all the interaction that happens on a daily basis. And we know what's happening within the negotiation track, and we also know what's happening outside the negotiation track. On a question whether it's a failure or not, I think, it's from the British government perspective, we did agree on certain things, we did progress on certain things, and as you said, there are bits and pieces we could have done better. But obviously, we are the host. We need to be neutral. Getting 197 countries to agree on languages and brackets and words to be put in there it's been tough. But having said that, I think there are a few things that was quite important to flag. And the negotiated outcome for this COP is, words on coal and fuel subsidies was never there before. The words like climate justice, some commitments to do something on loss and damage, and some sort of, we basically agreed that the developed world has failed to raise the US $100 billion by 2020 onwards, and say we work doubly hard to get that done. And we're also looking at possibility of a loss and damage, separate funding for that, and double our adaptation fund for that. So that's more on the British government perspective. We still think it's an important outcome, because between Paris and all those COPs we had right up to COP, progress has been extremely slow. So I think we managed to ramp it up a bit more. But, as I said, more things need to be done. You spoke about net zero. It is all pledges and committed at this point of stage. We need to deliver. All countries need to deliver. And while we deliver that and ensuring that, our economics grow, people's livelihood is taken care of, people are not paying from their nose on higher prices for renewable energy and whatever not. So affordability, security, and accessibility remains an important thing. From a Malaysian perspective, I think is there's a lot to look for, because prior to COP, I think the Malaysian government already said that our 2030 is now an unconditional offer of 45% reduction in emission intensity. I believe at some stage Malaysia will move from intensity to absolute emission reduction. So the question is when that transition is going to happen. Let's wait and see. Then they said, and obviously the Prime Minister said at the unveiling of the 12th Malaysia Plan, that we are looking into getting to carbon neutral earliest by 2050. So there's a caveat there. Obviously next year they are looking into developing these plans, right? There's an adaptation plan. They're looking at a climate change act. They're also looking this long-term strategy on decarbonization. And even earlier this year, middle of this year, they said, we're not going to invest on new coal power. And I always feel like, we are ramping up our RE, renewable energy, which obviously Sarawak Energy is also leading by example. And also, end of the day is you need to make changes. The impacts must be seen in the real economy, right? All this government pledges and whatever not, or even businesses pledging to net zero. It's all high level statements, but we need to see changes happening in the real economy, that people feel it, that actions are being taken to address climate change, not only in the urban setting, but also in the rural setting, because a lot of vulnerable people are the first to get the impacts of climate change that we need to understand. So I will stop there. Thank you. You're muted.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Muro. Yeah, thank you very much. So that is actually how the British, the chair of the COP president, and how the views of as a Malaysian. Okay, so if you look at it that way, Sarawak is a state in Malaysia which is blessed with abundance of hydro, coal, and gas resources, which are being able harnessed to light up the state using predominantly hydropower. So that is not so in the peninsular states. COP26 seems to focus more on coal and not really on fossil fuels. So a question is that Is Sarawak going to phase out the coal or phase down with the coal gradually? The agreement is that the countries will have to have net zero by 2050. Is it hydropower, or is it Sarawak Energy's digitalization journey that should be our main hope in achieving net zero and at the same time achieve sustainable growth? Or is it something else? The ambition to limit global warming to ideally 1.5 degrees C, is it achievable? Can we really achieve net zero by 2050, or at least in Sarawak? Mr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Right, Raman, yeah, that's a very valid questions, and you have put me in a very difficult position to answer on behalf of the company. But yeah, let's take a step back when I've shared our journey for the past 10 years. In the year 2010, we were actually a producer of I would say we only had 8% of hydro back then. Majorities are thermal, and a part of the thermal, I think about 36 to 40% are coal. Throughout the past 10 years, we were very committed to move towards a better or healthier generation mix. To, as of now we speak, we are 70% of hydro, and we only have about 30% of the thermal. I mean, many people have asked why not just go 100% of hydro, because hydro we rely on the rain, and only God knows when the rains will stop. So the other 30% is basically for insurance, for insurance, for security. Unlike Peninsula, in Sarawak, we are blessed not only with hydro, we are also blessed with indigenous, both coal and gas. So we are not basically important. We produce our own coal to produce electricity as a security, as a security for the people of Sarawak. As we speak as well, we have been committed with the phasing out of coal as well. The retirement of our older coal plants, we even carry forward. We even carry forward to decommission them and to retire them as soon as possible. But however, we left with only one coal plant, which is a Balingan power station, which was just commissioned in the year 2019. So that is our pledge, that we would not have any more projects for coal plant. That will be our last coal plant. And by then, in 2050, I think I would say that we could meet the net zero pledge.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. I'm so happy to hear that. So from Sarawak Energy we are committed that we can actually achieve that zero by 2050. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Okay. We all know that transitioning to zero carbon transport is essential to keep climate change in check. Kuala Lumpur aims to reduce carbon emissions in the city by 70% in 9 years' time, with a long-term aim of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. I'm in Kuala Lumpur, and that's what I think my mayor also says. Okay. Transportation accounted for the largest share of carbon footprint in cities in Malaysia, right? Accounting for more than 50% of the city's emissions. So in the news this year, it was stated that public transport ridership in Greater Kuala Lumpur is expected to grow by 5% annually, okay, following various strategies to be implemented under the 12 Malaysia Plan. Meanwhile, the 12 Malaysia Plan document said that Malaysia aims to become a transport and logistic hub in the region by 2025, supported by upcoming initiatives, including enhancing efficiency and leveraging digitalization in transport and logistics services. Our current environment, low energy prices, economic uncertainty as economies struggle to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, competing development priorities, and a complex political economy are challenges from transport and investments towards climate neutrality. Engineer Gandhi, You have mentioned earlier during your presentation that if we were to meet the 2050 commitments, drastic reductions are required. That also means drastic measures and actions are needed. Am I right? Do you think we have the ability to meet our commitments? Over to you, Engineer Gandhi.
Engineer Ma, you do certainly put some difficult questions, which is the right thing to do also. And I just want to apologize earlier for taking a little bit more time with my presentation. But just to say, look, where there's a will, there's a way. In the first instance, we certainly have to take some drastic actions. Take, for example, London, for argument's sake, they have got congestion charging zones. Unpopular to start with, but it was the right thing to do. They are also going to phase out all diesel and fossil fuel cars going into London. Okay, so therefore, the amount of EV network that you'll see that's in London at this moment, it took a while, but the grid is there now. So we need to take those sort of drastic measures, I would say, in Kuala Lumpur. Looking at ways to reduce congestion in Greater KL as part of putting maybe a congestion charging zone, zero emission zones, high occupancy vehicle lanes actually. But let's talk about public transport itself. Let's talk about putting zero emission buses, ZEBs, right, going into KL, BRTs, which will have a significant impact. Sarawak have got the right strategy in place already in the coaching urban transit system by going for the green hydrogen, CUTS ART project. So we should be replicating that in KL, not only KL, but in the bigger cities around Malaysia. Now, public transport is not known to have great returns, but it can do the right returns if it's planned well. The right ecosystem is in place, tracking and measuring the outcomes. Clearly think about the outcomes from the very beginning. It requires change in behavior of people using cars. Make it difficult for them. You need to take those drastic measures. Make it where it hurts in your pockets if need to, right? People will switch to transport at that point in time. So, we are relying on fuel subsidies, right? Take the subsidies away and make it expensive, right? It is not going to stop everyone, but it's going to have an impact. We need those drastic measures, really, and we need to stop doing what we are doing now. If not, this 2025 is a fallacy. We're not going to achieve that. We don't even have the ecosystem in place, really. So you need to create the ecosystem in place. You need to have the right policies put in place before you start talking about, achieving those ambitions. When the policies don't match the ambition, then you're not going to go anywhere. It's just then end up with just talk and half measures. And there's too many half measures that's happened, and we need to really look at more than half measures going forward. That's really my opinion in that.
Thank you very much, Engineer Gandhi. I think there is uneven development, right, in terms of social, economy, and also how we look at climate change, where some things changing rapidly and another things, I would have to agree with all the panelists that seems not to be changing at all and very difficult to actually change and very, very resistant. For example, the usage of public transportation, I would have to say. Yeah. So there's a question, a very interesting question that I would like to get the answer from Mr. Lee and Engineer Gandhi first, before we have Mr. Muru to comment on it. Okay. So the question is, what can ASEAN countries learn from the experience of the US and Europe with energy transition? Which areas to avoid, which support policies to consider? Okay, in the business perspective and as a policy maker. So maybe I can start with you first, Engineer Gandhi.
Look, there's always lessons to be learned from various sort of developed economies. Malaysia wants to become a developed nation. It's on its way to become a developed status by 2030 and so on. So look, energy transition, particularly in the use of energy, it requires transformation. I mean, engineer, Yao will probably have a better feel in this, but I would say it requires planned development across the entire landscape of how do you relook at, how do you consume as such. Those uneven developments need to be evened out. We need to look at priorities. We need to look at how do we finance this. These are some of the fundamental things. How do you finance this? How do you ensure that it's sustainable? How do you continue this, not for the next 10 years, 20 years, but for the next 100 years, right? I think short-term thinking needs to stop. Long-term, whole life cost perspective, economic analysis needs to be put in place as part of it. People's behavior will have to change in terms of consumption. And industries will need to think about technology, digitalization as a clear pathway towards them achieving sustainability in their business. So these are some of the measures that has to be done, because we can't just keep saying that we will aim towards it. Enforcement is going to be a key aspect of this. So change in policy in that sense will have to come in terms of enforcing this. And people might not like it, but it's hurting where it needs to hurt, and learning those lessons. And that's happened in Europe and in the UK, and they are pretty strict in some sense in this area. So we need to look at those lessons and adopt those lessons.
Thank you, Mr. Engineer Gandhi. Mr. Lee, would you like to comment?
Yes, thanks for whoever that have posted that question. That's a very valid question. I would totally agree with what IR Gandhi has mentioned. It comes to policies, it comes to financial as well. If the financials body won't finance the company to invest in the thermal plants, for example, it won't happen. But continuously, the financial body is still financing it. It's a bit of what we say and what we do. So Asia, US, and Europe, we can agree that it exists in a very different socio-economics in context, and we are at varying stages of development and have different needs to be addressed. Energy transitions policies and support mechanism must reflect the differences if we are to truly benefit from our respective economies and communities. However, of course, there are still lessons learned that we could learn from US and Europe in their energy transition journey. Major key takeaway that I would say that we could learn is to avoid over-relying on fossil fuels in general. We must get a head start in incorporating renewable energies into our energy sectors, mitigating the climate change to our environment and to our people as well. For developing regions, establishing reliable and cost-effective power supply across ASEAN will enable us to power the so-called social economy development sustainably. And this will bring us closer towards our regional renewable energy that we have targeted at, if I could recall, is 23% in the total primary energy supply by 2025. To realize this objective, we must replicate the interconnected power system of Europe that enhance electricity interconnectivities within our region in ASEAN grid. Yeah, back to you, Iroma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yauki. is very right, actually, right? There are always lessons learned from the Europe and US, but we should also look at our local circumstances and also ensure that we can learn from the lessons, and also we can achieve a sustainable growth and benefit our people. So let me pass over the stage to Mr. Muru. Mr. Muru, do you agree with the opinions of two of our panelists, what is said just now, Engineer Gandhi and Mr. Yauki? And if there are any differences, yeah, you may respectfully disagree with them.
No, I'm
Over
totally
to you,
agree.
Mr. Muru.
They are technical people, so they'll know the challenges and what technology can do now and the future. But I just want to add the fact that the one missing piece in the whole energy conundrum is the energy efficiency. I think we can do better in energy efficiency, whether it's in buildings, whether in other bits and pieces of the sectors. I think we're quite lagging behind that in Malaysia. So we're more energy efficient than the reason to build more power plant. Doesn't matter whether it's RE or whether it's fossil fuel. So less demand for it. So I think we need to do a bit more on energy efficiency in Malaysia. That will help us. So you have clean energy on side generation, and you got very good energy efficiency on the other side. That's good. Coal transition. A lot of coal generation in Malaysia is actually stuck with the PPAs, right? Long-term PPAs, with IPPs especially. So the question is whether it makes economic sense. If Malaysia Malaysia already said they don't want to build new coal power. So the question is whether this, whether it makes economic sense to do an early retirement old plants. Sarawak Energy probably will know this. TNB is also hosting a few in Peninsular Malaysia. The other one is very much technical questions, right? How you make the grid more compatible to accept more renewable energy. So it's good to see. I think, was it yesterday or the day before, TNB said they're going to invest in modernizing the grid system in Peninsular Malaysia. Obviously, Sabah and Sarawak is totally a different ball game. You have your own control over your grid systems. So that's something that'll be useful. Don't forget the future of gas and hydrogen, right? Hydrogen seems to be emerging. Maybe, I don't know, maybe after 5 or 10 years time, you may see a lot of hydrogen coming into the system in Malaysia, so that will help. But importantly, to go with all this energy generation is the battery technology, right? If you look at it, people say by 2030, by economic scale, that technology probably will drop by price. Pricing might drop, so that's good. 10 years ago, people thought solar was expensive. See how fast things have transition has happened, right? Even IEA got a surprise when solar prices just dropped like crazy over the last decade. So a lot of stuff to do. As you know, there's no nuclear options for Malaysia. It's very phobic matter, emotive matter, so that's not going to happen. But in US and Europe, nuclear is deployed quite a bit. It just falls under the clean energy category, so that's good. So gas, it's the biggest debate. People call it a transition fuel, but let's see the future for gas, because I have a feeling personally, after coal, gas is the one that people are going to target. What can we do as an alternative to gas? So that's why hydrogen and renewables and all this will be very important, and grid integrity is very important. And I agree that Mr. Lee said, we need to do more on ASEAN side in terms of connectivity and grid. I think that will be very important as you go to Sabah and Sarawak. And I know Sarawak is looking at how they can share or at least unload some of their excess energy to Kalimantan, because that's where the new capital is going to come for Indonesia, as well as to Sabah. Sabah is still very electricity or power poor. There's a lot of pockets in Sabah and Sarawak still inaccessible. So rural electrification is important. The question is, when you do rural electrification, do you want to bring the grid into the system, or you just want to create mini grids based on renewable energy? So it's a lot of opportunities. We just need to keep our broader sense of options out there and what makes clear economic sense going forward. Yeah, that's my 5 cents contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muru. For me, it seems like the current situation and way forward can be pretty challenging. Just like keeping the three panelists happy at once. Policy making is always a difficult thing, right? There's an economic perspective, there's a policy perspective, and of course, there's the technical engineering perspective, and we don't forget there's also, of course, there's also the political perspective. Okay, so in this case, one of the there's a question by an anonymous attendee. One of the primary targets of COP26 is to stop deforestation by the end of 2030. Okay, what is your take on this? Is it feasible? If so, the entire timber industry is at stake in this decision. I will start with Mr. Lee, right? On behalf of Sarawak State, with a lot of natural resources. Over to you, Mr. Lee.
Yeah, that's again not an easy questions to answer. I think in life there's everything. There are pros and cons. Definitely there are pros and cons. People may have said may have been zooming in the deforestation issues when we establish the dams, you know. But we are not focusing on the benefits of it. No. However, people has been saying that the solar is good. No, they have been zooming the good part of it, but people might have overlooked that even solar, to produce the battery, you know, to produce the copper and all those things, you need deforestation as well. It is also not friendly to the nature as well. So most often of time we don't look things from end to end. When we compare it from end to end, there were few studies saying that even actually hydro, it sounds like we need to deforestation, but the carbon footprint is much better than the other renewable energies. So I didn't really follow the COP26 that they mentioned to stop deforestation. In 2030 is quite, it's not too far off, and we are saying that with the populations of the whole world, even China is struggling. They are building hydro dams here and there, which they need to deforestation. So not too sure whether I'm in the right position to answer by 2030. Would that be at the end versus the population that's increasing? I think that's the food of thought that we need to compare and to see both ends and to look at the life end-to-end process. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yaugi. I can feel your concerns and the way you answer, very careful. Engineer Gandhi, as a civil engineer, what do you think? Can we stop deforestation by the end of 2030? But I still need a good house to live in, yeah, Engineer Gandhi? Over to you, Engineer Gandhi.
Thank you again. It's not an easy question, seeking a balance in this, right? But I think it's clear that natural forests are great carbon sinks, and so are other sort of plants or things that we do that can create carbon sinks. But look, deforestation has got impacts, far wider impacts in terms of displacement of air, natural biodiversity, animals, and ecology, and so you can talk about it in so many different ways. Look, timber is a sustainable material if it's used well, and so planting sustainable forests is becoming a new thing now, because timber can be used in replacement of concrete, and concrete has got far more damaging aspects with regards to greenhouse gas emissions than compared to getting this deforestation. So you need to look at a balance here. So if you can plant sustainable timber and sustainable forests that could be that can be utilized for our lifestyle, and this affects lifestyle, this affects consumption, this affects what people want. So, but as long as we stop displacing, I think, natural biodiversity as part of this, protecting the natural environment and getting the balance right, we then manage deforestation in a sustainable manner. I'm not sure whether that can be achieved, is possible to be achieved, and whether we can stop by 2030. I think it's not far off. And what engineer Yao said, it's not so far away. It's just around the corner. Blink and it's there. And so we need to get the balance right. And I'm not sure whether it's possible, honestly, and whether we have the right mechanism in place to get the balance right. That's mine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Engineer Gandhi. From our two panelists, Mr. Yao and Engineer Gandhi, we hear them say that sustainable deforestation is required. In a way that means deforestation will still happen somehow in a small scale. What we need is actually a balance, and get the right mechanism out. So that's one interesting question for Mr. Muru as a trained wetland ecologist, right? So as a trained wetland ecologist, I am sure he was long time ago when he was young, an activist. So what is your opinion? What would you like to comment on the need for sustainable deforestation, or is there such a word? Do you believe in it? What kind of balance are we talking about? And what is the right mechanism? The floor is yours, Mr. Muru.
Well, my take is it's important when I look at the declaration is halting deforestation. So if we are doing it in the right way, that's not, I mean, people talking about don't clear forests, right? Don't feel, don't fall your forests, like totally clearing it at one point. So sustainable managed forests, probably it's something that will continue. So I don't term that as deforestation. You manage your timber in such a way that you're not clear felling, then it's fine. But again, having said that, the question is, it's all about transition, right? What is the transition for the timber industry going forward? When many countries decides that, okay, I want to keep all these pockets of forest as totally protected, right? It's already happening in Malaysia as well. It's happening in many parts of the world. And the other thing is monetizing these forests. This whole carbon offset programs that's being ramped up now. The question is, opportunity costs of clearing versus keeping standing forests. Is that a monetary gain that's out there to the international market, right? Based on carbon. I don't limit itself to carbon, because you need to see forests, as Mr. Gandhi said, providing many ecosystem services. Carbon is just one, but it provides many other services as well. So we need to be very careful what we say about that carbon. Forest carbon is basically going to save all the forests in the world. No, not exactly. We need to see forests from a different perspective as wholesome, providing ecosystem services to communities, to countries, and countries need to treat forests as a national asset. It's an economic asset. Don't see it as as something that we need to exploit for lifetime. So a lot of thinking, structural reform, economic reform is important. When international carbon market come into fore, developing countries like Malaysia may benefit, but important. Whatever offset system that we are getting into, make sure there must be environmental integrity. That is, it's not hot air, and ensure the safeguards are really good and intact, and no loopholes. So we need to be very careful. And I think you probably know this, that CASA is looking into some sort of an emission trading scheme next year, trying to develop something. They're looking at carbon pricing. They're looking at trade and market development. So it'll be interesting to see how all these probably will benefit in the ways of keeping forests. And also the fact that I just want to highlight the fact that, when this phase out to phase down on coal was being negotiated, and at the end, I guess, India and China was pushing it quite hard for that phrase. There's also another clause they put that they call it just transition. Understand, right? When you say just transition is for India and China. Without them getting on the coal phased out, I don't think so we're going to have huge successes in terms of decarbonizing the energy sector, or at least the energy generation sector. So they say they want some sort of a just transition, meaning that how do I go from massive coal at some point in the future, there's a reduction in the way. So I think maybe the timber industry probably could look into that as well, or even the mining industries, right? So the question is, how do you do the just transition? It's really unfair for people to just say, this thing need to stop in 9 years time, right? It's all about how do the industries prepare themselves for the future. We are a trading nation, right? We are selling our timber, we're selling our palm oil overseas. The question is, a lot of these things are subject to sustainability standards and certification. So Malaysia is there doing well. The question is, the demand from trading countries, demand from consumer countries is going to grow. So how do we prepare ourselves to meet those challenges going forward? And in the process, also doing our bit in protecting the environment, biodiversity, and taking action on climate change. So it's going to be an interesting 9 years, I think, for a lot of these resource-rich countries, actually. And of course, CASA endorsed the Glasgow Declaration, Forest and Land Use. And the question is, I'm sure the ministries and ministers' concerns are looking into it. How do we do this better based on all the current certification that we have, and how can we deal with the just transition process if there's a need to do that? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful, Mr. Muru. It's about just transition. I think every country wants to feel fair, and that we all believe in equity and fairness. So just transition is actually what we are looking for. But every country might define just transition differently. So that's why the policy making at the highest level is very important. So as an engineer, Mr. Muru, there's another question for you. Because we have so many young engineers that are with us today. What do you think? How do you think the young engineers can train themselves to actually put up their views in an engineering perspective and also policy making perspective, right? Sometimes the young engineers will come up with super challenging technical things, but at the COP table, those are policy makers that might not even understand what they are saying. So probably you can give the young engineers some guidelines, okay, how they could actually educate themselves, so that I'm not so sure how many engineers are there at the COP table. Definitely, I'm not so sure from CASA is not our minister, right? It's our Director General. Okay, so over to you, Mr. Muru.
Well, our CASA Secretary General is an engineer, Dato' Zaini Ujang, is he not?
He is, but I think the one attended the COP is not him, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Dato' Zaini was there.
Yeah.
He was leading the delegation before the minister joined him the second week. For me, it's simple. I guess you need to have, there's so many engineering associations out there. So that's one way of doing that. And young engineers, obviously, young people nowadays are so vocal and willing to take on the streets. What happened in Glasgow, right? More than 100,000 people were on the streets, and till today they're not happy. They said COP26 should have delivered a bit more. It is set for failure. Whatever, not fair enough. I think that pressure must always be on governments. Almost 200 governments. I think that's very good. I think the young people are getting into it. They want to be part of the decision making. The same thing is happening in Malaysia. So I think at some point, I think governments will give that leeway by young voices, including engineers, to come on board and give that. The important thing is the passion, right? You can be working in any discipline. Doesn't matter you're a lawyer or a social worker or anything. But you really believe that we need to do more, safeguard our planets. Then I think whatever discipline I think you just need to position yourself that whatever you learned that will contribute for this. For young engineers, I think it's all about, I think the challenge is actually on technology. I'm not saying technology is going to solve all the problems, but I guess they have a big piece to play because a lot of things are coming out globally. A lot of businesses or technocrats or entrepreneurs are putting a lot of money into that. And I think the engineers just need to get sight of all these things and see where they actually can position themselves. But for now, I guess, their membership in various organizations, including Chain, for example, a new organization with young engineers membership. I think get sight of policymakers, speak to your MPs, push yourself, get young engineers need to be connected to other young organizations, young youth-based organizations that are dealing with climate change. There's plenty now in Malaysia. Be vocal, be out there. Social media is a great platform for you. And importantly is, I think whatever you say must make sense. That means it must make some sort of national stance. I mean, we are a developing world. So what exactly Malaysia could do? The just transition is important. And also don't hold back on ambitions. I think, you need to be as ambitious as possible. The way to hit your targets, as Mr. Gandhi said, and there's a lot of challenges along the way as a developing world. What sort of technology will work for us? We're a tropical nation. What sort of technology will work for us, and how fast can we get this technology? And I think that's the duty of, I think, our academic learning institutions. I was answering one of the Q&A earlier, suggesting that we need to have a lot of more integrated courses, not courses in working in silos. So when graduates come out, they actually can see many things. They can see the environmental perspective, they can see the economic perspective. So they'll look a bit more all-rounded. When decision making are being made, engineers should be there contributing as much as the economics are, or a social worker. So there must be a level playing field that everybody contributes to a just process in Malaysia. So I think that's the only advice I can give. But I will say this: keep the always continue to challenge policymakers. I think it's the duty of all of us. Challenge policymakers. Can we do better? I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muru. So for all the young engineers who are attending today, it's very important you keep abreast with new technology and also with what's happening on the world. Be vocal out there, and you are our hope, yeah? Okay, there is a question from an anonymous attendee. Okay, so the question states that for a modern coal power plant, for example, ultra supercritical plants like IChemE East or Mahjong 4 and Mahjong 5. There are many countermeasures to minimize pollution, making it cleaner, and most importantly, its efficiency is much better than traditional coal-fired plants. Does this still make coal-fired plants bad, in inverted commas, considering the raw materials, rare earth required to produce solar panels, batteries for energy storage? Let me see, it scroll up somehow. Yep. So the question, I think the question, I'll address it to Mr. Yauki, right? Because Mr. Yauki is also in charge of, responsible for the digitization in Sarawak Energy. So is digitalization our answer? Over to you, Mr. Yauki.
Yeah, thanks, Arama. I think to answer this is quite broad as well. Let me see how I could put it into context. I think there's two parts, right? One part is the pledge that we're going to stop coal, regardless of in advancing of whatever technologies. And that is already a pledge for COP26. But what the audience that have posted the question, which is very true, by increasing the efficiency, we can basically reduce the carbon footprint as well. But coal is unlike gas. We can still try to reduce the methane. We can try to make gas as clean as possible. Coal is coal. Coal is coal. As of current technologies, we are nowhere near to reduce the carbon footprint in that sense. Okay, but again, US, Europe, ASEAN, we are in a different social economics. Coal is still needed for most of the developing countries. They still need it, but what have been highlighted, like giving example like in the IChemE, which is very true. When we were to implement a new coal plant, let's bring the digitalizations in. I've seen that, because in Sarawak Energy, I have seen the transition because we were a very traditional powerhouse to moving towards a digital power plant. A very traditional powerhouse we have, because of the data are all scattered around. There were no platforms to integrate all this data. It makes it very difficult to increase the efficiency. Hence, we are not doing very good in the environment. But if we start new at coal plant, if it comes together with all the digital stuff, definitely it will brings the carbon footprint to the lowest possible part. Yeah. So in the digital transformations, I would say to move towards in managing the energy demand better, we have to look into the problem first. The problem of most of the traditional powerhouse is we have lack of integrated platform, data are siloed. We are unable to track historical patterns on supply and demands as well, the trends. And also, there is also an absence of a roadmap towards adoptions of new technologies, action plans towards energy efficiency. So with digital transformations that is carried out by an integrated operation platform, where it facilitates the integrations of both energy demands and supply, I would see that through the digitalization, it will be a facilitator towards cleaner energy in future.
Thank you very much. Definitely digitalization will help to reduce it. I will take it that way, but coal is still coal, yeah? So I hope our panelist, Mr. Yauke, has answered that question. Okay, so there is another question by Kate Lim. Okay, so he commented that the London initiatives like zero emission zone and congestion tax would help reduce the private vehicle usage in Malaysia cities, particularly in Kuala Lumpur. So this question, I will get Engineer Gandhi to answer. How would you feel about the impact of initiatives on the logistics sector? Also, how it would be integrated with government propaganda that tries to abolish the highway toll fee, which indirectly invites more vehicles onto the road. Following up this question, there's also a question from Abhishek. How do we stress the importance of climate change to the common man? So in this case, Kate Lim is actually talking about the initiative in the logistics sector from the government policy, like we have lower tax, low petrol subsidies, that of course then is more convenient. And of course in Malaysia, we are always talking about last mile connectivity. We still need to fulfill that last mile connectivity. So to all of us as a for the layman out there, how do we stress the importance of climate change to the common man? Over to you, Engineer Gandhi.
Thank you. Again, it's not an easy question in the sense. If I come to the first one, in terms of logistic hubs, and I think we need a better policy in terms of integrated transport, in terms of how do we move goods throughout Malaysia, and so I know that there are plans for inland ports and integrated hubs, but it's also how do you use the highway efficiently. It's not a matter of lowering tolls or abolishing tolls. Those are concessionaires, and those do not may have some impact on logistic aspects, but it's how do you have a better framework in this case for movement of goods, and how do you start considering platooning, let's say? How do you start using technology to move goods as part of it? Let's take electric vehicles as part of it. Sorry, my dog is barking in the background. So how do you look at EV vehicles? Let's say the trials that are ongoing in the Scandinavian countries of using various logistic EV vehicles and platooning and moving goods at speed. How do you integrate that with ports and railway systems? And how do you look at using maybe less or low, more efficient transport vehicles and such, and taxing vehicles that are who have got higher emission? So there's various considerations that needs to be considered. In the UK, for argument's sake, lorries that are high polluting or higher emitting vehicles are not allowed to enter certain zones. So you got to have technology to follow that. You need to have part of technology tracking that and then enforcing that. So you need to have this whole ecosystem built in. And what I meant earlier is, I don't think we are there. So we need to have the policy, the framework as part of the whole thing to drive this ecosystem, right? Common man, I think unless, common man needs to realize themselves, right? I mean, you governments can do all sorts of things. I mean, there's carrot and stick. I think I'd rather work with the carrot. If you do the right things and provide them with the right mechanism and influence them in a way that provides them benefits. Let's say in the Scandinavian countries, you put the bottles, you put the cans, and you recycle your paper, you get benefits, you get paid for such things, right? You put it into the machine, it gives you money back or gives you vouchers to go shopping and things like that. You can influence people in so many different ways. Don't use sticks, because stick just doesn't work. It just enforces different behavior. Rather, we need to look at carrots as part of it. We need to look at government, more messaging of the impact to them. But as I mentioned earlier, you also may have to use sticks in terms of increasing or taking out the fuel subsidy and changing behaviors, forcing behavior changes. So there are various means, but a common man shouldn't be hiding, or common person shouldn't be actually hiding in a cave and need to come out and look at every single thing that everybody does will have an impact, and they can make a positive change. If they believe that they can make a positive change, that change will happen. That's my belief.
Thank you very much, Engineer Gandhi. Yeah, I think the statement common man just need to realize by themselves is very, very important, and how to we actually sticks doesn't work, right? So to actually put in carrots, then incentivize them to do things, probably that's more important. So that comes to the question that as a Malaysian, okay, Mr. Muru, what do you think about the difference in the policy making here? How do we put the carrot out there? How do we incentivize our people? What is the main difference compared to countries in the Europe in terms of incentivizing the people getting to the right direction? Does sticks really work? It really doesn't work. Does carrots do they really work? What do you think? Over to you, Mr. Muru.
Yeah, before I answer the question, it's going back to the question of coal, because the statement said in COP is unabated coal power, meaning that if you have a coal power plant stored with carbon capture and storage, then you're good to go, because nothing will be released. So I think we need to be very careful when they say what is unabated coal power plant, abated and unabated. So let's be clear. But the question is, a coal power plant with CCUS facility or capacity, is it economically viable? That's another question we need to ask people who wants to invest going forward, especially those who want to build new power plants. So I think the best option is it's to phase down over time rather than looking this option of abated coal power plant going forward, because I think the economics is going to be not there at this point of time, I would assume. But of course, CCU is very important for the oil and gas sector, which I'm sure they're going to invest in the near future. Okay, on your question on all these things on policies, so one thing that Malaysians don't like is, which is always a political minefield, is taxation, right? Right? You start taxing people more given the condition. So I think the best way is what sort of incentives you can give. Recycling, there's a lot of incentives. How can you make it better, right? What about urban farming? What about putting solar panels on your roof for those who can afford it? So there's many things coming into the system, right? The question is, what about people who got land, right? What can you do with the land? Can you start farming, or do you want to grow forests on it or fruit orchard? So get it more green, I suppose, sitting idle rather than, for example, a lot of people with probably an hectare of plant probably say, okay, I probably will clear it and plant palm oil or something like that, or rubber. So things like that. I mean, the urban people probably got more options because a lot of us live in most of us live in modern buildings, and we can retrofit for those who can afford it. When you move into flats, I think a lot of new flats are being trying to get more greener in that sense. And the way the electricity tariff for us is good. The more you use, you pay more, which is not good. It basically encourages you to use less. But obviously, a lot of people don't. I mean, mid-sized family probably are paying like, I don't know, 300, 400 ringgit a month in KL, in urban areas. I know. The question is, you can do a bit more, understanding your footprint, the options of green energy, where's there, and obviously, as Mr. Gandhi said, a lot of this is habits of recycling and only going out, traveling. Do you need to drive all the time? I mean, another subject matter that you raised earlier, Engineer Ma, is the last mile connectivity is still an issue in many parts of Malaysia. That's why people drive. So how do you incentivize that? There are bits and pieces that the government can do. The question is, again, I had to use the word just transition. People need to know, by doing all these things, how am I benefiting from? I mean, you can say I can benefit because now I sound more green. I can go out and vouch for it with my neighbors. But deep down, is it making my life inconvenient, or am I saving some bucks? Right? Am I saving some money at the end of the month? So a lot of economics that we can put into context, a lot of behavioral change, that you feel positive, you feel more spiritual that you have done this. So it's a combination of both. I think it matters for us. And one thing, as you know, generally that Malaysians don't like taxation. But having said that, we got many subsidies, right, including fossil fuel subsidies for RON 95. So perverse subsidies, as some face, we need to phase out. Government must find a ways. If I remove subsidy here from the Malaysian people, so what am I doing with that how do I say, with that revenue that now I'm getting, because I'm not spending on subsidies? I have this revenue. Can I take this revenue and do something good for the people? Say, can I probably sort out my last mile connectivity for transport? People want to know that, right? You've got to be very transparent. Whatever savings we do, when you park it somewhere else, make sure that it's driving some sort of green agenda or climate action, then people will be happy to contribute. But it goes in a black hole and nobody knows where it goes. I think that's a problem. So it's for governments and societies to give new ideas on how we can work on all this market mechanism.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muru. Our panels today have been seeding us a whole bunch of insights and ideas and what we should and have to do for us to consider. Unfortunately, we have technically less than 5 minutes left. So for that, may I request our speakers, each one of you, to give a one-line advice for our aspiring engineers and all the young engineers who are attending today. We will start with you, Engineer Gandhi.
Young engineers, I would suggest, like what Mr. Muru said earlier, arm yourselves with knowledge and data. Make sure that you are up to understanding what's going on. Get involved. Push yourself out there. Get involved at the policy level. Engineers love solving problems, but get involved early on, because this is where you're going to have the greatest impact. So my advice to them is arm yourself with knowledge, arm yourself with data, and go there and make it happen.
Thank you very much, Engineer Gandhi. Mr. Yauki, as a mechanical engineer and of course, the future of Sarawak, please ensure that you continue to light up all the lights of the Sarawakians. So may I have your advice to the young engineers?
Yeah, thanks, Arama. I think everyone have a choice when we make a decisions. I think one of the questions earlier was focusing on the younger generations was very vocal in the COP26. We are dare enough to go on the road to demonstrate, to show our dissatisfactions as well. we have a choice to make as a young engineers. We can always magnify the negativity of things, you know, but I would always suggest or encourage younger generation, the millennials, to also take the opportunity to see the positive side and to create, because you guys are, the millennials are very blessed with innovations and creativity. So tap that opportunities, tap that your strength to look at that and to create some benefits to the nation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yauki. Fascinating conversations, and I believe there will be much more conversations along these lines in the future. But the most important thing is still action. Policies and plans must be put into action. Mr. Muru, your last sentence and advice for our engineers. How can they make the policies and plans into action? Mr. Muru, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Janima. I mean, that's the most difficult, isn't it? I mean, writing a policy, you know, probably I can sit behind a table and write a policy. But the question is all about the execution and the implementation. Is always a challenge, not only in Malaysia and many other countries. So there's something that we need to reach that gap. And the other one I think is very important is where I think the engineers or young people, including engineers, can play a role is pushing government to be more consultative in the approach. I mean, try to get as many open consultation going. I think it's very important. We can't, gone are the days where government knows everything. But I think this is like a bottoms-up approach. And I think in Malaysia is anything for the good of the planet, for the good of people, environment, taking action on climate change is a good example of that. I don't think there's anything politically sensitive about that. I think end of the day is, you know, we're all trying to save what is good for Malaysia, protect what need to be conserved, and because it has economic ramification, it has health ramification, as Mr. Gandhi mentioned, and many other bits and pieces. So I don't think so. It's a very sensitive issue. So people to go out there, young people, including engineers, to go out there and say, look, we need more actions from the policymakers, not only talk but also clear policies, execution, not only at federal level but trickling down to state, local government and communities. So I guess I would say that, like, keep the battle going, keep the noise coming, and appreciate government where it's needed, as Engineer Lee mentioned, but also always talk about challenge that we can do better. We can do better. That's the whole idea. You know, as a parent, I can do better. As a child, everyone can do better. It's always don't get contented, but always think, you know, we always can do better and find ways how we can do that better by learning from others, or even, you know, broaden our scope of knowledge and speaking to a lot of people, and organize ourselves when we channel all these ideas and criticisms or constructive criticisms. I think that's the way to go forward. And I think young people are the future of this country. I think we're quite a young. There's a lot of. I think our young demography is quite big in Malaysia. I think there's a lot of voice for you all to do. We just need to ensure that you know, as we move forward politically, I think the government will also progress and young people will come into fore and be fair, I suppose. It's a subject matter. I think it's not only matters for Malaysia, but the rest of the planet. I think it's not many other things that matters now. I think, and I think Malaysia and the Malaysian youth, including engineers, jump on the bandwagon and make their voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muru. So to all young engineers out there, keep the battle going, keep the noise coming, ensure that will be your tagline and takeaway for today. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Muru. Thank you, Engineer Gandhi. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for your good insights. And thank you to the Organizing Committee of CHAIM Malaysia. Thanks to the audiences for the questions, and apologies if I didn't get to some of the questions. And thanks again to CHAIM Malaysia for organizing this panel. Thank you all very much indeed. With this, I pass back the session to Eva.
Thank you very much, Engineer Ma, and all the speakers for the insightful discussion just now. We indeed gained valuable knowledge during the discussion just now. Before we leave, we also glad to say to you all that CHAIM Malaysia is now still opening for more volunteers to join us for our future events. So everyone is welcome to contact us at the email on the slide or via our social media pages on FB, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter if interested. On behalf of the CHEN Malaysia, I would like to thank again to our guest speakers and for all the audience for your full support and contribution. We do apologize for any inconvenience caused in today's event. We hope that you have gained some insight about COP26 and have more understanding about the link between climate change, sustainability, and engineering. Till we meet again in the upcoming CHEN Malaysia events. I'm Eva Glenn Robert, your MC for today, signing off. Take care and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, I'm Kane. So thank you so much to everyone, especially our speakers, Mr. Muru, Mr. Yauke, Engineer Gandhi, and also Professor Aziz, who actually called just now to ask how did it go. And also to Engineer Ma for being our moderator. It was a really great session. So yeah, I think all of us have learned a lot, including the floor and all. So yeah, I think that wraps our event. And once again, thank you so much and enjoy your weekend.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice
Thank
weekend.
you.
Bye.
Goodbye.